Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Innal hamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. To proceed, brothers and sisters and friends, I greet you with the warmest Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to talk about Christopher Hitchens and some online atheists. Why do I want to do this? Because there is a narrative from the works of Christopher Hitchens, and also from his videos, and I dare say his rhetoric, and also a narrative from atheists online, that they claim religion is bad. Religion poisons everything. And looking at these videos and listening to Christopher Hitchens, sometimes you may think, you know what, he may have a point. They use rhetoric and imagery and eloquence. But I want to show you that we should not take these people seriously at all. Why? Because they are not nuanced, they are not academic, and their rhetoric is not based on any type of truth. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because when we scratch the surface, we expose the fallacies that they're coming up with. For instance, take Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great. Let's take page 13. And I think page 13 summarizes all of his work. And he says, as I write these words, and as you read them, people of faith are in the different ways planning your and my destruction, and the destruction of all the hard-won human attainments that I have touched upon. Religion poisons everything. Well, is that true, Mr. Hitchens? Is that true, my fellow brothers in humanity, my fellow atheists? Is it true that this rhetoric that you are equating religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism with evil and poison and murder, is that actually true? Is that a false narrative or a true one? Is it actually true that religion does degrade society and actually makes life worse? Because this is the type of rhetoric that we're seeing, and frankly, it's wrong and it's not nuanced at all. And I want to show you this by actually being nuanced and actually going to academia. Because this is something that you'd realize the atheists online, and especially Christopher Hitchens, moves away from rational discourse and towards rhetorical discourse. Let me give you some examples. Now, in 2000, political scientist and professor Robert Putnam, he surveyed 200 volunteer organizations, and it showed that there was a positive correlation between religiosity, being religious, and membership of volunteer organizations. Meaning that the more religious you are, the more likely that you're going to volunteer to these organizations. Take, for example, well-being, self-esteem, and crime. In 2002, Brian Johnson and colleagues of the University of Pennsylvania Center for Research on Religion and Urban Civil Society, they reviewed almost 500 studies that had been published in peer-reviewed journals, and they concluded the following: that a large majority of the studies showed a positive correlation between religious commitment and higher levels of perceived well-being and self-esteem, lower levels of hypertension, depression, and criminality. Take, for instance, depression, drug abuse, and suicide attempts. In 2002, Smith, McCullough, and Poll, in the journal A Meta-Analytic Review of the Religiousness Depression Association, Evidence for Main Effects and Stress Buffering Effects, carried out an analysis of over 200 social studies and found that high religiousness, so the more religious you are, predicts a rather low risk of depression, drug abuse, and fewer suicide attempts. Also, religion is a buffer against mental distress. In 2001, Schnittke, in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion, examined a dataset of almost 3,000 adults from the general population. He found that religiousness was a buffer against mental distress. What about being happy? Surveys by Gallup the National Opinion Center, and Pew Organization, prestigious research organizations, concluded that spiritually committed people are twice as likely to report being very happy than the least religiously committed people. What about giving, altruism, charity? Well, according to the Oxford Handbook of the Sociology of Religion, published in 2011, they said the following. However, regarding American giving to charitable organizations, they found an association with religiosity by analyzing the data from the 1996 Religious Identity and Influence Survey. The 13% of the American population which considered itself non-religious gave less money to charitable organizations. And that's why social scientist Arthur C. Brooks, he analyzed data that consisted of nearly 30,000 observations drawn from 50 communities across the United States. And they asked the individuals about their civic behavior. And he concludes, the differences in charity between secular and religious people are dramatic. Religious people are 25 percentage points more likely than secularists to donate money. What about altruism? Again, the Oxford Handbook of the Sociology of Religion concludes, and it talks about various studies in the United States. It says, this study shows that religiosity was more salient in directly promoting humanitarian compassion. So the more religious you are, the more likely you are to display characteristics and behavior that are in line with humanitarian compassion. So from this perspective, does religion poison everything? No. Christopher Hitchens was a rhetorician, and frankly he was wrong. And it is no wonder the Quran, the book of the Muslims, that Muslims believe was sent down by the Creator for our entire guidance, says in a very beautiful chapter, chapter 90, talks about these things as moral motivations. The Quran says, what will explain to you what the steep path is? It is to free a slave, to feed at a time of hunger, an orphan relative or a poor person in distress, and to be one of those who believe and urge one another to steadfastness and compassion. So next time on the internet, when you see this imagery and you see the likes of Christopher Hitchens saying religion poisons everything, remember, it's not nuanced and it's devoid of any academic rigor. And there are many online atheists that do this too. For example, Thunderfoot. You see Thunderfoot, he has pictures of mujahideen or violent Muslims or terrorism and links it to Islam all the time. Again, a very unnuanced, unacademic approach to these type of discussions. But maybe that's for another video. Take care.